Hello and welcome. I'm Robbie.
And I'm Jay.
And you're joining us for episode 6 of Generations Apart, the podcast where we chat about gaming and technology across the generations, sharing our perspectives on the past and our excitement for the future. On today's episode, we're discussing game streaming, chatting through the various different options to stream games directly to devices rather than running them locally. Before we get into that, though, Jay, what piqued your interest this week?
Thanks, Robbie. So there's only really one thing, excuse me, that I can talk about this week in terms of my interest. And it's really where my focus has been ever since the launch. So PSVR 2 launched on the 22nd of February. I got my unit on release day. And although we're recording this on the 27th, I've been playing with this now for obviously about 5 or 6 days at this point. Thoroughly impressed, really pleased with the unit. I'm not going to spend too long getting into all the details because we're going to do a whole episode on that. So keep an eye out for that on a future podcast. But all I want to say for now is I think the hype is completely justified. I think it's a really interesting step forward from a VR perspective. I have sampled 4 or 5 games now at this point, so I'm not going to pretend to have gone through the whole library. I've played some of the showstoppers, so Horizon Call of the Mountain, really impressive. Was slightly concerned with some of the previews of how you would move around in that game. There was a lot of talk that you'd have to physically run with your arms, which for those watching on camera was a literal sort of bizarre sort of over jogging, if you like, really over animating the jog. Pleased to say that you can actually choose to do that, or you can just use the analog stick, which makes much more sense. Yeah. So that's great. And then I've got Gran Turismo 7, so I had a little go at that, and it is as immersive as everyone said it is. Really does just change everything when you're racing in VR. Not a big driving fan, and I think a lot of people who've said the same have still found this incredibly addictive, and it's got me that the itch I once had going back as far as Gran Turismo 2 to play driving games again. There's part of me now that wants to jump back in, and I haven't experienced a Gran Turismo game probably since GT4, which I think was a PS2 game. So I'm a few generations behind, but maybe this is the one to get me back in and enjoying VR again. Racing again. The other games I've picked up, I've got a Zombieland, very sort of arcade shooter game, lots of fun, very good for new VR enthusiasts, minimal motion, and I have found myself, even with the new headset, and it's my problem, not the devices, suffering a little with motion sickness.
I was just wondering, actually, maybe that's why they get you to run with your arms for Call of the Mountain.
I think part of it is, yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to do that, though. I've played too many video games for too many years to want to be moving around with my arms like that when I can use an analog stick. That's just, unfortunately, how my brain's going to work. And then aside from those, I've picked up Kayak Mirage, which I thought was going to be a really sedate experience, and I think it is once I start the game. But the motion sickness has been the worst on that game.
It's almost like seasickness, that game, surely.
It's not so much the seasickness. What it is for me, and I noticed it just a tiny bit in Gran Turismo 7 as well, is it's when my body's expecting serious movement, but then it doesn't feel it.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. Paddling on Kayak Mirage, just gentle forward motion, no problem. As soon as I turn and turn severely, so you can put your oar in the water and you're encouraged to lean, and then your boat kind of jerks quickly to the right or left, that's when I felt it. And I could feel myself getting warm and a little bit dizzy, slightly nauseous, and I thought, I don't like that. Similar with Gran Turismo, hitting the corners and then sort of changing direction quickly, I noticed that just gave my stomach a little bit of a moment. So, I think that's about me getting more comfortable, though I haven't properly played VR for a long time now. I've used kind of the experiences we've talked about previously, like the Workrooms apps on Meta's headset, things like that. But in terms of gameplay, I've not really played much in the way of games for a while. Probably not since the PSVR, to be perfectly honest. Quest 2, a limited amount with things like Beat Saber and stuff like that, but not properly immersive games. And then a couple of the honourable mentions. I also paid the princely sum of about £8 per title to upgrade Tetris Effect and what's the other one? Brain's gone. Res Infinite, which if you've ever played that was a PS2 title back in the day, really trippy kind of music rhythm game. I ironically bought them on the PSVR, and more games than I'd realised, which and I never played them. So I'd never actually played Res Infinite on my PSVR. I'd bought it and never started it.
Yeah.
So I've paid £8 to upgrade it, and I haven't yet started it. So, well, I will. And there was a couple of other titles I was able to upgrade for free. And I think you're going to see that from some of the older games. There are a few games still trapped on the PSVR. Some people are doing free upgrades. Some are doing paid upgrades. Some aren't offering anything. So there's a game called Moss, which is a very popular VR game. That is currently locked for me on the PSVR. And there's no upgrade path for that. But they are selling a PSVR 2 version, which I feel is a little bit naughty.
I do like that they are upgrading a bunch of them, though. Because they could have just easily had none of them come through. So at least you get some of them, which is good.
I mean, to be honest, it's extra money, though, isn't it? I mean, they'd be daft not to. If you've bought the PSVR version and, you're not going to pay full whack for it, you might be prepared to pay, like I did, £7 or £8 to upgrade it. If you'd asked me for 20 or 25, I'd have gone, no, you're okay. I'll just put the other headset on.
Yeah.
I'm not that bothered. But for a few quid, for me, it feels like it's worth it. So we'll see whether they do that with other titles. There's been loads of announcements since it launched of games that are coming over now from the Quest and PC VR, which is great to see. And of course, you're getting much more horsepower here than what you're used to with the Quest, if that's been your only experience, or for me, your most recent experience, because I haven't really played much PC VR. So yeah, the graphics, the uplift, the headset is as comfortable as the previous one, which I'm really pleased with. The controllers are great, proper VR controllers rather than those awful Move ones from back in the day.
The Wii remotes.
They were terrible, yeah. And I'm only looking off to the right here for those watching on camera, because that's where my headset and equipment literally is right now. I also bought the charging dock for the controllers, which I think is pretty decent, quite pricey for what it is. I'd have liked a little bit more snap when you're putting them into place to sort of tell you've docked them correctly, or some sort of a noise perhaps. There's a small pulse of light on the controller that says I'm charging, but you want something that feels a little bit more clunk, it's magnetized, give me something. But otherwise really impressed, and I look forward to showing it to you in a few days time, Robbie, and then we'll do a proper deep dive episode where we'll get into all the weeds. But
I can't wait to try it out.
Really dominated my interest for the week, so really
I'm not surprised.
Else I could go.
That's a pretty exciting week, and I can't wait to try it. I've heard amazing things. Lots of people have said that it's well worth it, and the best way to play VR for the price, because it's remarkably cheap, although you do have to have a PS5 already.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. I mean, if you do buy a PS5, you're getting an exceptional gaming console. So if you're into that world anyway, you've either got one or you probably want one. The equivalent from a PC VR perspective, I would say we can do the comparisons and save that for the deep dive, but I suspect the PS5 probably wins out in terms of what you get for your money. And but yeah, if you're comparing it to the Quest, which I think is an unfair comparison, probably.
Unless the Pro,
then absolutely it's more expensive. Yeah, although for the Quest Pro, I mean, you could absolutely get a PS5 and a PSVR 2 and have change for a good chunk of games. So, but we'll save all those maths for the full episode. Robbie, throwing it back at you, what piqued your interest this week?
So I saw an interesting story where a couple of YouTubers, let me just pull it up on screen, and Evan and Caitlin.
Familiar with them? I am a subscriber.
Yes, they built a custom £100 as in weight.
Yeah,
43-inch laptop,
not currency.
43-inch gaming laptop. Essentially, it's like a pretty wild DIY project where they get a 43-inch TV and surround it in some wood and embed like a keyboard and a mouse pad. And it's huge. It does actually fold up like a laptop. And there's images on the... I'll post a link to the web article. There's a quick video giving a demo of it where they've actually got it on their lap. I mean, they're not sat on like a chair. They have to be sat on the floor because it's so big. And And the initial GIF that you get in this article as well, the guy's struggling to open it from the kind of closed format of this laptop. It is absolutely huge. But I just thought it was really funny. So
I saw you put the link into the show notes, and without knowing where the link went, just from the title alone, I realised I think what this was, and I've watched their video of the full build. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. They're an interesting couple on YouTube. They do some really weird builds, some funny stuff, some odd stuff, some quite cool stuff. This is one of the weirder things that they've done. But it's well worth a watch just to see how it comes together. And I think you may find it interesting to see how he designs the internal components, because there is a full-on, as you say, full-on gaming PC inside that unit. And the keyboard is comically large as well. It's not like a standard keyboard.
No.
It's a large keyboard with big, large keys. So well worth going and checking it out.
Yeah, I think the video's in the article as well, so everyone listening can check it out once they see it in the notes as well.
They do some interesting stuff, and they've done stuff in the past. They've done things like, and I'll get my pronunciation spot on here. They have flocked a keyboard.
What's that?
With like red, so like so it's like a flocking is sort of thing you might do on a gaming board, and they typically sort of flock things with like a fake grass or something like that. They did this with like a red velvet texture. So it's like a powder that you effectively spray onto these coated keys, and then they had a flocked velvet touch keyboard. Silly things like that. They tend to find that YouTubers, the ones that I follow, the crafters at least, go through these sort of phases where they kind of copy each other. Someone does something and then someone goes, I like that concept, I'll do that, but I'll do it slightly differently.
Yeah.
So there's another YouTuber I watched who followed the flocking of keyboards with the flocking of a toilet seat. So they had a velvet place to put their bum, so it's Bevan and Caitlin's channel's well worth a look. They do some really clever stuff. And even though the stuff they do is weird, as they've built out, because I've been following them for a couple of years, as they've built out their toolkits and their machining techniques and their skills with things like 3D design and printing, they're doing some really cool stuff. And it's just fun to watch, even if the idea is a bit silly. 43-inch laptop, it's obviously not designed to be a serious concept. It's a fun build for a YouTube channel, but it is still interesting to see how they overcame some of those challenges. There's more to it than you might think.
Yeah, I'll give them a watch. I'll give them a subscribe. That sounds fun. I'll definitely have a check out a couple of their other videos, and highly recommend everyone listening to check out that article as well, where the videos in there about how they built it. But that's what piqued my interest this week: a 43-inch laptop.
I'll ask you a question before you move on. If such a device was to be produced and manufactured by a technology manufacturer, so not out of wood, would Robbie, the tech enthusiast, be interested in a 43-inch laptop, or would that fall firmly into the gimmick category for you?
It's not convenient to bring around, really, is it? I mean, to be fair, I've got a desktop PC and I carry that around. I've got like a case that I can bring that around with me, with like a monitor and everything. It's by no means 43 inches, but I do carry around an actual like desktop PC inside and outside the house and over to friends' house and things like that. So I guess the convenience of carrying it around, it's probably way more cumbersome than that, but it might not stop me. It's tempting.
I love it.
If it was sleeker and a bit lighter.
PC around. Yeah, I can't. At some point, I need to see that bag that can house a monitor and a full-on PC. Yeah, that's bonkers.
Yeah, I'll bring on the bag at some point. It's quite hefty.
Love it.
There you go. Right. So today we're chatting about game streaming, and so that's the likes of Xbox have got their Game Cloud. There's a few other that we're going to go through today. But what we mean by game streaming is, instead of running it locally on your PC or on your console, it's running games through the cloud on a kind of hosted service by someone else. So, and there's a bunch of different benefits to doing that. One, the hardware is really expensive to have yourself, to get like a gaming rig, or the consoles can be quite expensive as well. Or perhaps you don't even want to buy the games, you just want to test them out. So streaming services is a really good way of offloading a bit of that cost and testing out a bunch of games that way instead. The way it works, I'm going to touch on it very lightly, very high level. But if you imagine like remote desktop, I know I mentioned this before, and Jay was like, "Are anyone going to know what remote desktop is?" But if you log on and say remotely to someone else's computer, that's essentially what a remote desktop is. It's like that, but the computer that you're logging onto is a server hosted by, say, Microsoft for xCloud, for example. And it's specifically used to run games. So you use their hardware, you use their graphics cards and CPU and storage and all that to run these games. So it does mean you have to have like a really solid internet connection to be able to connect to these services. And I'll get onto some of the drawbacks in a bit, but essentially it's just connecting to a different service to use their hardware to run the games. And you just stream the video whilst obviously kind of sending over whatever you're pressing on your keyboard or your controller.
Just quickly throw in one of the benefits. I know you sort of touched on the convenience of not having to purchase the expensive hardware. I was going to say the other thing as well is I think that the play anywhere concept, whether that's, playing on a console, because you can, on Xbox, for example, access xCloud and stream games without having to install them. So if you don't want to download 50 gig because you're in a hurry or you want to try something out, like you say, you just hop in and stream. You can obviously do it on your mobile. You can do it through a browser on your laptop. Or recently, and this is xCloud specific, I think at the moment, they've done a deal with Samsung, or they're working with Samsung. It might be LG. Going to get fact checked in the comments, but one of them has released an app for their app enabled television. So now you can download an xCloud app and then pair your whatever controller of choices, Bluetooth to your TV, and off you go. So I think there's all the stuff you mentioned, but as well just that concept of play anywhere.
Yeah, which is wild.
Play instantly, which is the other thing, isn't it? Because the biggest frustration with games these days, especially when we're talking about digital and patching and updates, is that a game can be up to 100 gig or more with the modern consoles, and if that game needs an update, you've got to sit and download that painful update before you can jump in with your friends. Yeah. So I think that the immediacy of access is probably something I'd also call out.
100%. And I'd also say, like, if you're in that ecosystem, whatever service you end up using, you get saves across all your games as well. So you can pick up exactly where you left off. Say you've got the PlayStation Plus Premium, whatever it is now. We'll get onto that in a sec. If you've got that, you can continue the game on whatever device that you're playing that on. Maybe it's your phone or tablet.
And it genuinely works really well. I think Grand Theft Auto is a really good example of this. I've got that had that on various consoles now because it's been around, feels like forever. But I had a save game. Xbox uploaded that into the cloud. I got my phone when xCloud first came out, launched Grand Theft Auto on my phone. First of all, that blew my mind. I was like, wow, that looks really good. But my save game, all of my data was just there. I didn't have to do anything. Yeah. And then, of course, any progress I made, I didn't really play it for very long. It was just a test, but any progress I had made would then have been available to me, when I got home. It's really good for people who either have to share like one main console or big TV at home, or maybe people who travel, who are having to sort of spend time away from home at hotels, things like that. There's a nice sort of pick up play convenience attached to that
hotels. Well, you did say you have to have a solid internet connection. I don't know the hotels you've been going to, but I never get a good internet connection.
I agree. You need a decent internet connection, but I don't think it's about speed.
No, that's true.
I think you mentioned it in your notes. It's the ping, isn't it? It's that's more important. And I mean, I have been able to play gaming online from a hotel before. Although I will say it wasn't xCloud. This was me taking an Xbox, because I used to do this, to hotels in London when I used to spend several days away in London. And I would sit in my hotel and I would pick the hotel based on the quality of the broadband and make sure that I could play while I was away, because I was bored. Stuck in a hotel. So I had a travel Xbox, which was a Xbox One S, all digital, or SAD, I think they called it, Xbox One SAD.
Oh, SAD.
Which is probably how I looked and felt while I was doing exactly that.
Your Xbox into the hotel. Yeah.
Smaller and didn't require a special bag. I could just put it in a suitcase. So
easier to carry, I imagine, than the 43-inch laptop.
Yeah, or a full-blown desktop PC.
True. But I suppose that is the key benefit, isn't it? That it's console level games or, PC, gaming PC level games that you can play anywhere. You don't need the hardware. Quick and dipping in and out. You can access all your games on some of the services that we chat about. It's accessing existing libraries of games that you might already have. So yeah, some amazing benefits of cloud streaming. The drawbacks, though, and this is it's put me off for a very long time actually doing it. So I suppose we'll get to the end on our verdict on whether we think it's worthwhile. Obviously, the two of us, we have a lot of hardware between us anyway, so we don't always need to stream. So maybe we're not the target audience. But the drawbacks for me, the top one has to be the latency between your input, say you're using a mouse and keyboard, and it actually moving on the screen. So for some games, it's not playable. Anything that's first-person shooter and requires kind of quick movements and real accuracy for shooting and things like that, it's just not for me. I always struggle. I can always sense the latency, and it might just be a me problem. I know you've said you're okay kind of streaming in hotels and you've streamed various other games and they're fine. I think I might be quite sensitive to it for some reason. I can always tell, and it really, really bugs me. So often I can't get away with game streaming just because the latency is a bit of a nightmare.
I think it depends on your experience, doesn't it? You've just mentioned your PC, your desktop PC, and it's a powerful rig, and you mentioned keyboard and mouse as an input mechanism. I don't use keyboard and mouse, never have, and probably never will. It's I'm console 99% of the time. I'm also not used to, I guess, things like 120 FPS, where I might notice some of those challenges. I'm much more comfortable and used to 60 or less, in some instances. So it's probably less noticeable to me. I must admit, I have played a variety of services, and we're going to go on to talk about some of them. So I won't get into them in specific detail, but there have been varying quality of experiences. Yeah. I've seen people play Halo on xCloud and be perfectly comfortable and enjoy the game. I think if you're going into it expecting to be, your most competitive self, or trying to be competitive, it's like anything. Yeah. Then you're going to need to invest in the relevant gear to make you competitive. You're not going to get that from your home PC. Or from your mobile phone, sorry. And I think, like you said, it's not for you and me. Yeah. It's not for the guy who's got the Series X or the PC. And I think one of the things that perhaps it's worth considering that this does, before we get too busy at bashing it, because there are some challenges, is that I suppose it levels the playing field a little bit. It gives people, it sort of democratizes access to gaming a little bit. Yes. In as much as you don't need a £500 Series X or a £2,000 gaming PC, or even a high-end laptop or mobile device. Mm. You just need a reasonable PC, iPad, something like it, equivalent tablet, and an internet connection, and you can play. Okay, you might not be competitive, and you're not going to be able to hold your own with the world's best Modern Warfare players or Fortnite or whatever it might be, but you can play. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's making it accessible to people who perhaps previously couldn't have afforded it, or who want to play next gen but can't afford the latest PS5 or can't find one. Yeah, for 2 years it's been impossible to buy one. So now they're starting to come back into stores. But if you wanted to, you could have your PS4 and you could still access through the right PlayStation a premium. I think we'll come to that. Yeah. The right subscription. You can access game streaming, so you can play it on your PC, you can play it on another device, and that's great. Yeah. So I think we shouldn't overlook the fact that it's opening that world.
No, absolutely. And I think it's not just the games that you gain access to, it's also playing with your friends. So we stream on Twitch, and we've finished Gears of War 1, and we did that over Xbox Game Cloud, and it worked really, really well. And I think we wouldn't have had access to the game otherwise, because it's kind of a classic game now. And yeah, I just made the whole process so easy and seamless to play together. I've got the subscription to the Game Pass subscription, so I could download it onto my PC, the same game, but it's not cross-compatible PC and Xbox, for at least the classic version of Gears of War 1. So the only way I could play with Jay is through the cloud streaming. So again, it's not just the games that you're gaining access to, it's also the people who have those consoles that you can play with as well. So you can continue to play with your friends where you couldn't before.
And there's a whole separate episode we should do around cross-platform and the benefits of cross-save and cross-progression and all that good stuff, because I think there's a whole argument there to get into. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think, I mean, obviously I was playing it for clarity on my console.
Yeah.
So I wasn't experiencing the game through the xCloud services, but like you said, you played the whole game start to finish over the course of 3 evenings.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't remember you complaining once.
Yeah.
And like you said, it might have been a noticeable bit of latency, but I guess you get comfortable, you get used to it. Gears as well was never a game that ran even well at 60, I think. I'm sure, but the early games were locked at 30.
Really?
I think they were in story mode. There was something weird. It was one of the later versions I remember reading about. So I think, you know, again, probably a suitable choice if we were trying to play Warzone or something like that. You know, we probably wouldn't have had the same experience. But I think a cooperative game like that, or a single player story game where, you know, you're fighting against the computer and you're having to deal less with other people, because that's where the challenge comes, isn't it? When other people have got superior hardware or superior connectivity. That's the problem with you're on xCloud or just trying to play it on your PC.
Yep.
You can play a first-person shooter player on a PC or even on a games console, and if your ping isn't as good as somebody else's, you know, you're at a disadvantage. So of course you're going to lose out on xCloud or a similar service. So yeah, I think it's got its uses, isn't it? And that's the key thing to bear in mind. Is perhaps it doesn't work for absolutely everything.
Yeah.
But as a way to open up your game library and give you more options on the move, they're really quite viable now.
Yeah. Other kind of drawbacks to kind of mention. So some games go in and out of rotation. So you may join these streaming services playing a bunch of games that you really enjoy, and then they're off the roster. So a lot of the streaming services have a list of games that they bring in. Some of them stay around for quite a long time, but some of the indie ones in particular, they get decommissioned after a period of time, and then you either have to buy it or you just don't play it anymore. So there's a bit of a drawback in terms of you may be getting really into a game just at the end of its life cycle on that particular streaming service, and then you have to either go out and buy it, and at that point you might need to go and buy a console or something else to play it on, depending on your setup.
That's true. It's worth noting as well, and I don't know xCloud specifically, but I certainly know that this is applicable to Game Pass for Microsoft, and I assume PlayStation do the same. You do get a sizable discount on that game as part of that. So if that game does leave that service, you can often buy it for a fairly chunky discount.
Yeah.
Doesn't solve the problem though that you were describing, but worth calling out.
Fair. So let's chat about the different options then. And the first one we're going to talk about isn't actually an option, but it's more of a call out as the OG, one of the original game streaming services. The first one that really brought it to market. And that is a service called OnLive. I'd be interested to know if anyone actually played this at the time. And OnLive, you did, Jay. Okay.
I owned it. So, OnLive, I think this was 2010. I think OnLive became a thing. I didn't have it straight away,
but I imagine they didn't release anything until.
Yeah, I bought mine a little bit later into its life. Got it through eBay, secondhand, and it was basically a small Apple TV-like box, Roku box, you know, some small little box that you plugged into your TV, and it came with its own custom controller, and then you had access to a library of games to play. I tried playing at the time Batman Arkham Asylum, which I think even then was maybe a year or two old. It wasn't brand new. This was one of the things, it didn't have cutting edge latest games. But tried to play Arkham Asylum, and the latency was a real problem. Exactly as you described it. You know, my internet wasn't the best, but it was by no means poor. Like, I didn't have, by the standards of 2010, bad internet.
Yeah,
I had a decent broadband connection. Was it as good as, you know, some of this hardcore stuff you could have bought then, and the sort of stuff that we all take for granted now? No, it wasn't. But it was good enough, and it didn't run well. It wasn't a great experience. So the library was a bit old. It was a great idea, I think, perhaps way ahead of its time.
A bit too ahead of its time. I think that's the issue, wasn't it?
Yeah, but a decade probably ahead of its time, to be honest.
Yeah, well, it seems to be. Yeah, 2010.
Yeah, and of course we've also had at the time, I'm not sure the time period, but they had a competitor by the name of Gaikai, which I think was more from sort of Japan. So those are the sort of two competing services trying it out in this space. Yeah, it's a shame. Great idea, love the idea, but and I'll be honest, other things that let it down, and these are silly things, but again, they're problems that we've solved now. The controller, people take for granted just how good a PlayStation or an Xbox or even a Nintendo controller is and how it feels. If you've ever tried third-party controllers on any of these consoles, they tend to be pretty awful. And this controller was similar. It was poorly designed. It just didn't feel very good. It felt a bit cheap.
They iterate over
the quality of the
generations.
hardware let it down.
I think that's the benefit of consoles. It's like was it the Duke? Was it
the Duke? We've talked, yes.
For the Xbox controller, the first one that was horrible, but that was their first console, so they had no experience making a gamepad or anything.
But I guess it's R&D and budget as well, isn't it? You know, at the end of the day, unless this brand took off, they're not going to be able to compete with the likes of Sony or Microsoft. You know, it's just not going to work.
Speaking of which, they were eventually purchased by Sony in 2015. It said, and then the other service you mentioned there was a Gaikai, was also purchased, I guess, is what this article is suggesting, and that's what led on to them creating PS Plus.
There was a lot of talk at the time that PlayStation needed to buy one or the other, and they bought Gaikai in 2012. I didn't know until we started pulling the notes together for this show that they also bought OnLive. I thought OnLive had just wound up, so I was quite interested to hear they'd picked that up.
Yeah.
So they ended up buying, 7 or 8 years ago, the two predominant game streaming platforms, and still were not the first ones to come to market with a product that actually allowed you to do it. xCloud beat them to the punch by, I think, a good 12 to 24 months. I don't know if you've got the dates for release of those two services, but
I actually don't. Check it out.
PlayStation's offerings came very recently, and there's still quite a bit of difference between the two as well, which we can get into when we reach that point.
So that was our first. It's not really an option anymore, as we know, because it's we just mentioned it's been bought out. But we did want to do an honorary mention just because it was one of the OGs and a bit of a trendsetter in the market, even though it was probably a decade too early. And it really did set the trend for others, I think, at the time. And the idea, I think, is what sold it. The idea that you could stream games remotely, even though the hardware wasn't there, the networking capabilities weren't really there for most people. But what an exciting innovation, early innovation.
It wasn't particularly mobile either. I think you could, from memory, do a little bit of something through the browser on like a laptop. But of course, 2010 was the year of the iPad. So there was no such thing as, iPads. iPhones were still very much in their infancy in 2010 when that came out. So I don't think that the sort of spread in terms of the devices you could use it on and the technology was there to support it.
Yeah.
Way too early on many accounts, I think, which was a real shame. Great idea, though.
It is a great idea, and it seemed to have caught on. So I'm going to talk about our second option, which is arguably the most popular one at the moment, and we've mentioned it already a couple of times, and that's Xbox cloud gaming. It still says beta. Actually, I've only just noticed cloud gaming beta.
It still technically is in beta, I think.
Oh, really? Okay. So this comes with the Game Pass Ultimate, Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription service, which is a bit like the a more premium version of the Xbox Live, kind of the OG Xbox Live, or now as Game Pass, where it's a means of also playing online with friends. You get, I think, monthly games as well. Do you get that with Xbox as well? I know you do with PlayStation.
And that's still technically classed as with gold, because the gold is still a service you can buy.
Yes, yeah. So the ultimate one is just...
The games are really weak now, though.
That's fair.
Yeah, the free games are rubbish. It's worth noting this Game Pass and Ultimate are the two separate subscriptions. Excuse me.
Well, this is Xbox Game Pass Ultimate.
Yeah, Game Pass is console only. Ultimate is console and PC, which is where the xCloud fits
streaming.
In. Yeah, and streaming, yeah.
So that's what this comes
with.
Although
it's weird, because if it's still in beta, is that really part of your product, or just something you get access to? It's
I will
slightly
say,
strange, isn't it?
I will say, after playing it for Gears of War for our stream, it's not the easiest to navigate to. It's almost like they're trying to hide it. So it definitely feels like it's in beta. But it is a service.
There's an xCloud app, I think, for your desktop. I think
there's an Xbox app for PC. That's
is
what
it just in there? Is it not a
Yeah.
separate app?
No, it's
I
the
know
same
on
app.
tablets it's a bit. So there are apps on the App Store for tablets and devices that are not Apple. There is not an Apple app because Apple got funny about their wanting to take a slice of your subscription fee. So if anyone knows, I think Apple charged 25%, or used to.
I think it's like
for
30.
all, is it 30
Yeah.
purchases through the App Store? Microsoft said absolutely no way, and then Apple went, well, you can't have an app on the App Store then. So there is a workaround. You basically have to go to it via Safari and bookmark it, and then it creates an icon that looks just like an app, and it works just like an app, and it's basically an app without an app. So
Just run it through
works.
the web.
It works perfectly fine. Yeah, it works absolutely seamlessly. So slightly odd, but yeah, you're right. And it is still a beta in terms of a service. So I suppose it makes sense that maybe it's not been pushed out widely. Although, like I mentioned, there are now apps coming to certain manufacturers' TVs.
Yes.
I'm sure it's Samsung.
Samsung have got a good kind of array of apps, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's Samsung. LG as well also have it. I did read somewhere that I think Apple TV, they don't do xCloud, but there is a streaming service in my notes that you can get a Apple TV app which allows you to do game streaming through that service. I think I'm going to talk about it later. It's Shadow Tech or Shadow Cloud Gaming Computing that we'll talk about at the end. There's actually
being educated on that thing because I've never heard of it, and not that I'd necessarily use it, but I'm intrigued all the same. So
yeah. Well, what's unique about they've got so many different names for it, so I never know what to call it. xCloud, I'll call it. What's unique about this?
It was Project xCloud, and then it's become Xbox Cloud Gaming, just because it's a bit more user friendly.
Rolls off the tongue.
Yeah. I suppose it is what it is. It is what it says on the tin, isn't it?
It's true.
It's Xbox in the cloud gaming.
But what's unique about this subscription, and it's $10.99 as well, just to call out, $10.99 per month. And although they do so many different offers, you can get like a free first month. I'm pretty sure if you, it's not, you get like a free 3 months with loads of different random types of purchases. Most tech purchases these days come with a little voucher that you can get free 3 months. You can find a free 3 months of xCloud for pretty cheap, if not for free these days. So it's fairly easily available and easily accessible, but $10.99 a month after whatever trial ends. But what comes with that as well, as I've mentioned, is you can get it on your PC to actually download the games as well. So it's not just the ability to stream games, you can download them onto the PC. And it's the same with the Xbox consoles as well. You can download the games onto there from their large list of games that they have available through streaming and available through this service as well. Or you can stream it through these various devices.
Worth also calling out that the one thing that differentiates it from the PlayStation offering, which we'll come on to, is that I think what makes Microsoft's proposition more attractive is that Microsoft first-party studios, of which they now own many, their new releases come day and date to Game Pass. So if you think about Halo or Forza or Gears and many others, they drop day and date on Game Pass at no extra cost. So if you think about what you might pay now, £60 or £70 for a brand new game, that's the kind of going rate. If you bought Forza for £60 or £70, or Flight Simulator, as you're scrubbing past that now, if you bought one of those games, you could have had best part of 7 months worth of Ultimate and had access to that game all the way through. So, you know, it starts to make it, and I found this because I'm a Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscriber. I bought my console on the monthly package, a bit like a mobile phone contract where you pay for the console and your Game Pass subscription monthly, which worked out really well for me. I got it on release. It's becoming harder and harder in my head now to justify purchasing games from other providers. So I'll give you an example really quickly. Going back as far as I think something like FIFA 95 on the Mega Drive. That's probably the earliest I can remember. I have always had an annual football game every year since 1995. Whether that was FIFA or Pro Evo, I flew back and forth a little bit between the generations. The last 2 years, is the first time that I've not bought
Mm.
the flagship FIFA game or Pro Evo. Been FIFA now for quite a few years, but I haven't bought it. I didn't buy FIFA 22, and I haven't bought FIFA 23. I've played them. So I played a 10-hour trial for FIFA 23. I was not that bothered. I'm not that invested anymore. And I downloaded FIFA 22 via Game Pass because EA Access is part of Game Pass.
Yes.
There's a whole vault of old sports games. And I waited 6 months and I downloaded it. It was something like April, May time. And I had a few months out of it and enjoyed it. And I've just been playing with some friends on the older ones because I only really play against my mates. So I don't think that habit would have changed had it not been for Game Pass. And what Game Pass has also done for my friend group is it's opened up a world of games that they wouldn't normally have tried.
Yeah.
So I had a couple of friends who were really just kind of mainline FIFA players. That's all they really got into, FIFA, maybe a little bit of Call of Duty if you twisted their arm. But because Game Pass opens the door to so many more titles and all of the Microsoft stuff first party, multiplayer experiences especially become much more enriched because it's not gated anymore by a £50-60 purchase, which some of my friends may have found difficult to justify. Instead, everyone's in day one.
Yeah. And this is what I mean about it's not just the games you get access to, it's also just playing with your friends. So depending on the ecosystem that your group of friends is in, you get the same benefit with PS Now Premium, PS Plus Premium, whatever it is. Again, we'll get onto that in a second.
That's it.
But
Catchy.
If you have a bunch of friends that have a PlayStation, they play online on PlayStation, then it's a good way to hop on that ecosystem for fairly cheap without having to buy the hardware and everything. So yeah, it is a great benefit.
The only thing I will say, you're absolutely right, as long as you want to play the old stuff. So where it's challenging, and I think where Microsoft's proposition is, like I said, slightly more attractive, although their exclusives are arguably not as good. So, I guess you give and you take. If say when Halo dropped last year ago, I can't remember how long it was now. It was the year before last. When that dropped, we all jumped in day one and we all played together. And we had a few rounds, had a bit of fun. I'll be honest, we kind of fell away from it quite quickly and we moved on. Same with Forza, same with Gears 5. We all played that through together, did the multiplayer, played Horde, got a load of good fun out of that and then moved on. I think that the challenge of PlayStation at the moment and one thing that's holding them back, I don't know why they haven't done this yet. There must be a reason. They're making loads of money, it's probably why. But they're not adding their latest releases, of which there are many exclusives and from sort of PlayStation studios. They're not adding them to the service until much later down the line.
Yeah.
So they're pushing for the £70, £60, £70 purchase, and then they're bringing it to those left later on.
Yeah.
So I struggle a little bit with the value of PlayStation Premium.
It's an interesting point.
I'm sure you come to mention there's a hell of a catalogue there. They've got more of a back catalogue to draw on.
700 games PlayStation have, and I think when I looked, Xbox was around 300 to 400. So quite a lot less games, but I guess they're more modern. But it raised an interesting point because the other drawback, I think, of streaming services, Xbox in particular, and has been bashed for this, and it's for that very reason that a lot of the games are on there from launch, is that a lot of game companies are losing quite a lot of money. A lot of creators lose quite a lot of money when it lands straight on the streaming service at launch. Imagine in the film industry, straight to DVD. It's the same concept. You lose a lot of the sales, you lose a lot of that marketing hype, you lose a lot of the because it's far cheaper to get into it and also ditch it, and so they lose a lot of these initial sales that they put a lot of marketing into for the launch. Because they go straight to the streaming service and they get a fairly small cut.
Which is fine, I think, for those non-Microsoft studios. Yes. Although I've definitely read articles that suggest that they make good money on those, that they get more coverage. But I think that you've got to bear in mind Microsoft has spent, I don't know how many billion, I forget what the ridiculous value of the Activision lawsuit and purchases at the moment, but they've acquired some massive studios. So, you think about the games that are now going to be day and date on Microsoft going forward. If the purchase of Activision goes through, your Call of Duty franchise is there every year.
That's wild.
Which is, for a lot of people, the only reason why they have an Xbox or a PlayStation. 360 sold bucket loads on the back of Call of Duty's popularity.
Yeah.
If you look at things like, is it Starfield? Is that the new one that's coming from Blizzard?
Okay.
Blizzard? No, who's the makers of Skyrim? Brain's gone.
Oh, Bethesda.
So, Bethesda. Sorry, Bethesda. So Starfield's the new one coming from them. You've got the whole back catalogue from Bethesda available on there, and of course anything new that they release. And there's a whole load of other studios that are sort of less reputable that are dropping games on there. And of course, Microsoft's propping them up financially.
Yeah.
And they must be making millions off Game Pass.
Yeah.
And Game Pass, I think, I wish we had the stats. I think Game Pass has still got more subscribers than PlayStation Plus Premium.
Oh, undoubtedly.
Despite the install base being significantly lower for PS4 and PS5 versus Xbox, because of course it's multi-platform. The other thing I was going to say to you as well, and I don't know whether you know this or saw this in your reading, and I could be completely wrong, so please call me out in the comments if this is wrong. I think there's a limit to the number, if any, of the PS3 games that are on that service.
Right.
And the reason why I say that is that I know that there's a lot of PS3 games that are locked on the PS3 because of the PS3's architecture. So things like Metal Gear Solid 4, for example, is still, as far as I'm aware, only playable on a PS3 to this date. So the rest of the games in that series can be played on multiple devices, going back as far as the PS1. But Metal Gear Solid 4 is still trapped on the PS3 because there's a lot more work in re-architecting it, which is why the PS4 moved to a more PC-like architecture.
So which would you say is better for classic games then?
That's really difficult. I mean, I think it depends on what you loved. The PS Premium has probably got more air quotes classics because it's got more generations to call on.
Yeah.
But I would probably say that Xbox has done a better job of giving love to the back catalogue. So backwards compatibility, which is not really streaming, it's kind of a separate topic in its own right, is something that Xbox have been working really hard on. So if you put a disc from your Xbox One or your Xbox 360 into your console, there's a good chance that disc will play and just natively play on that device.
Yeah.
Whereas you can't do that in your PS4 or your PS5. You can't whack a PS1 game in and it'll play.
Yeah.
The only way to play that is through emulation, and that's through the streaming service or through by downloading it onto that device as a digital purchase. So I think it's different. It's hard, isn't it? That's really hard one to measure.
Yeah.
But PlayStation have probably got more in the locker as far as classics go.
When I looked at the games that they had, there is a really, really long list on the PlayStation Store, at least. And for those who are watching on YouTube, I'm bringing up on screen the different tiers of PlayStation Plus plans that you can get. And it's only the premium one, which comes with the cloud streaming and the classic catalog, the classic game catalog.
Yes, it's the highest tier you've got to pay for to get access to that.
Yes, and that is $13.99 a month. So that's slightly more expensive than the Xbox Game Cloud by, say, £3 a month. But they have...
And like I said, that fee doesn't include the latest, God of War Ragnarok or Horizon Zero Dawn, whatever it is, Call of the Mountain. Those games still cost you £70.
Yes.
Or a bit less if you buy them on disc. So the value proposition, I think, is lower. I think it's great if you want access to that back catalogue, but it's not a fee that's getting you anything moving forward without you having to wait, a bit like waiting for the film to go, to use your analogy earlier, waiting for that film to go from cinema to DVD to Sky or something, or to ITV or whatever. There's that kind of, you've got to wait until PlayStation deem it appropriate to make that game free.
Yes.
Whereas that if you buy into the Game Pass model, that you're going to get those games day and date with everybody else.
What I did notice,
I don't know.
What I did notice when I was looking at the PlayStation one, is that they have an awful lot of Ubisoft games specifically. It's one of the game companies that they work with a lot, it seems. So basically all of the Assassin's Creed seem to be on there, or at least the classic ones.
There's been a lot of talk about Ubisoft, because Ubisoft have got their own subscription platform, haven't they? And I think there's been a lot of people saying that either Microsoft need to buy Ubisoft, because I think Ubisoft are struggling by all accounts, or do a deal to bring it to their platform. By
just purely based on the research for the streaming services and the different subscriptions that you get with PlayStation. I think Sony are more likely to buy it than Microsoft, just because they seem to be very closely aligned with the games that they've got in their catalogue.
That would be a big loss for... Well, I say, would it be a big loss? I think a few years ago, you'd have said that would have been a huge loss for Xbox. But in reality, and I know we're going off topic a bit, if you look at some of the franchises that make Ubisoft what they are, they're not what they used to be.
Yeah.
They've had a few recent duds in there. The Ghost Recon series has took a real nosedive in the last couple of versions. The last Far Cry didn't sell as well as previous ones or review as well. Assassin's Creed's still going relatively strong.
Yeah.
But that's a game they were desperately in need of some new IP. I think.
And the Far Cry's are all on here as well for if you really like the original ones. Fallout's actually, so it's got some Bethesda stuff. They have a huge catalogue. Worth browsing through the amount of games that they've got on here. And I'll keep these links in the show notes so you can check them out. But there is a huge catalogue on here, but it is, as you say, not the latest games. It seems like they do wait a little bit for the stuff to come out. It does have God of War. Do you know which version that is?
It's the PS4 version. If it's just called God of War.
Yeah.
But again, that was free when I bought my PS5 for anyone because it's classed as a classic from the PS4. So if Ragnarok had been on there, I'd have gone, all right. But Ragnarok's what, six months now more old?
Yeah.
No, maybe not. Was it late last year? It was late last year, wasn't it? So, but it's probably reaching 6 months now, 4 or 5 months. That's nowhere to be seen on those services.
I did read a couple of articles in my research for this. A few of the editors of these articles, the writers of these articles, were thinking that eventually they were planning to bring out the most modern games on the streaming service to compete, I think, with the likes of xCloud.
And they need to. And I'll be honest, if they did that, I will subscribe instantly, because that, especially as an all digital edition owner, I'll get into that mistake another time, then that would be great for me, because I would be all over that. I'd pay the $13.99 a month and run it alongside my Xbox, because it would give me access to games in a much more affordable way. But I'm not really interested for a back catalogue. It's too expensive for me just to have it there as a back catalogue machine.
Yeah. I think I'm a bit biased. I think I prefer the games that are on PlayStation. So I think, I would be the same if that came out and it was the latest game. It should just be a no-brainer.
They will eat Microsoft's lunch. Microsoft are going to have to keep buying up studios with big brands, because there's just too much in that library, and too much, even something as simple as, I'd buy this anyway, but Spider-Man, the new Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
That's a system seller for Sony, and they know it. It's a massive franchise. If you could buy your PS5 and then pay $13.99 and just have Spider-Man and all this other stuff available, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And people will keep those subscriptions and just keep going. So I think it feels like it's an inevitability. It feels like they've got to do it at some point, but they haven't yet. So who knows?
Well, I think the other thing to mention, obviously, is that it has similar benefits to xCloud, in that if you're in that ecosystem already, it does make sense to kind of extend it a bit more, so you can do that streaming. If you're going to get into game streaming, you have a PlayStation 5, you get that kind of cloud backing up of saves, kind of instantly picking up where you left off on whatever device you pick it up on. So they're similar in that respect, that it's the ecosystem. If you're in that ecosystem, it makes sense for that streaming service. I'm
conscious of time, Robbie, and I want to get to some of the other things you've highlighted in the notes, and I want you to tell me all about what in the world GeForce Now is. Is anything else that we need to cover off on the big two, I suppose?
No, I think that's
PlayStation and Xbox.
Well, arguably, GeForce Now is a pretty big contender as well, but I'll get onto that in a sec. But I do think
only for the PC Master Race,
more for the PC games. But no,
I've never heard of it. I didn't even know it existed until I think it was Xbox. There was a news last week that Xbox had done a deal to bring Xbox's games to GeForce Now for a certain period, and I was like, "What is GeForce Now?" So, please tell me, what is GeForce Now?
So GeForce Now is it's another streaming service. It's predominantly it is aimed, I think, at PC gamers, and you can tell that by the marketing, because Nvidia obviously is a PC hardware company. They make graphics cards for PCs.
Yeah.
So a lot of their pitching of the streaming services, it talks a lot about the hardware that you're getting. So it talks about, you'll get the latest Nvidia GPU on their server to run your games. And so it is aimed at the people who know that kind of hardware, it seems, at least, on their marketing stuff. So anybody who has a PC with an NVIDIA graphics card, you may have even seen a lot of the advertising for this service through the GeForce Experience, which is the software update for the drivers on your graphics card.
This is like a blind spot for me because I'm not a PC gamer. And obviously when the PS5 shortages and the Series X shortages were going on, there was also the challenge around graphics cards. And I think it was, I'm going to say the 3090, is that right? It was or the 4090, I might have made that up. There was a really desirable high-end graphics card that no one could get their hands on. It was like gold dust. It was similar to the consoles.
It was probably the 3090 at the time, yeah.
I think it was. So is this effectively then, I can't get my PS5 or I can't get my 3090 at that time, and it's probably changed since. But what I will do is I can subscribe to this service and I can unlock the power of the 3090 through this streaming platform. Is that basically what they're trying to sort of pitch it as? It's don't buy the hefty graphics card if you don't have the money, unlock access to our hefty graphics card and we'll push the best graphics to you via your internet.
It's definitely a benefit of this service is that the hardware can be really hard to come by. But it's a similar benefit
and expensive.
And very expensive. But it's a similar benefit to the other consoles and all the other streaming services is you can play it anywhere, so it works on all these devices. I think it might have been, is it this one? So this one works on Mac, which I'm not sure how many do, but that is, I don't think there's many that actually do work on Mac, other than through the browser for most of them. But I think this has like a native application. It works on Android devices as well, which might include Android TV. Some TV apps support it as well. I think I've got a Samsung TV. I might have even seen it on there. It's natively supported, I think, as applications on iOS, so it hasn't had the battle I think that xCloud has.
Have you tried it? Have you had a go on the service?
I have, and one of the reasons I've tried it is because its membership options are really interesting. So they work in a very different way to any of the other streaming services. They work in terms of access to the servers in chunks of time. So I'm bringing up on screen the different services that you can get. You can actually use this service for free, but you only get an hour. So you get to use the hardware for an hour. And the issue with that is also you get put in a queue to start that hour. So they have limited amount of space on these servers for the amount of time that you can spend on it.
It's basically it's demo membership, isn't it? Really, or just
basically
try a game, try the service, and if you like it, then we expect you to buy it.
Yes, but interestingly, if you pay $8.99, which is their cheapest of the paid version of it, you get what's described as a premium rig. It doesn't give you the specific hardware on it, but it does say it's RTX for ray tracing, which is a fancy feature you can get on pretty high-end hardware these days. But it extends your hour-long session to 6 hours. So it's still capped in terms of hours per day.
Okay.
It does say, though, that there's no limit to how many times you can, jump off and come back on in that day. So even on the free one, you could do an hour, finish your hour, and then get back in the queue again.
6 hours, you go, there's 24 hours in a day. But in reality, how
Are
many
you doing 24-hour long
really get to spend more than 6 hours in any given block of time without taking some sort of a break or needing to do something else like a day job? So I suppose that's not too bad. Interestingly, you're going to talk about the more expensive version in a minute.
Yeah.
It strikes me that model is a little bit more similar to Netflix, which has its kind of HD and 4K membership tiers. So it's more about the graphical fidelity than the vastness of the library.
That's what they're selling. So it's fundamentally everything else is the same. The games you get access to, the things that change are the hardware, the level of hardware. So that equals performance, and as you say, fidelity as well. But also the time. So the top tier, which is their ultimate subscription, is I think the most expensive. Actually, no, it's not the most expensive streaming service that we've got on the list today, but it is up there. It's $7.99 a month. Sorry, $17.99 a month. But this is the one that gives you access to an RTX 4080, which is the latest series of NVIDIA graphics cards.
Which one's more expensive? There's nothing more expensive than that, is there?
Not of this GeForce Now, but of the streaming services today is what I was referencing. There's another one that we're going to chat about in a sec that is more expensive than this.
Right, okay. I was going to say, I'm scrolling through the show notes. I can't see any of the prices. So, okay. Well, another surprise.
But yeah, and that one streams 4K resolution at up to 120 frames per second. So that's the other thing about the $8.99 is that's 60 frames per second and 1080p resolution. So you do pay for that extra resolution and the extra frames per second, and you still get a cap, which is still, it feels a bit weird, but it's an 8-hour session cap that you get.
Yeah,
and again, it feels like
more than double the price. Well, no, it's double the price, isn't it? You're getting double the frames, but you're not getting double the playtime.
I think it's because it's unrealistic, really, that someone's going to sit down and play for 8 hours. Or more.
It is, but why cap it? Why not just say it's 16 hours or 12 hours and double the previous one? If you think in reality no one's going to do it, why would you not just?
It's a fair point.
But there must be a reason why they've done it.
I think it's the servers to run this stuff is really expensive, from what I gather.
Yeah,
and you can see that from the last option that I've got on the list, the Shadow Tech one. And that's a unique offering, and that is it's similar to this. And
let's not jump to Nintendo because we don't want to miss out the other big gaming one. But yeah, the Shadow Tech interests me. Just quickly ask, because I'm just conscious of time again. But you said there's 1,500 games available on the GeForce Now.
Yep.
Obviously, that doesn't include, or maybe it does now with Xbox's deal, some of those Xbox exclusives or some of the games you might normally associate with Xbox. But presumably it's got very little in there from a PlayStation exclusive perspective, because there really aren't many. There are a handful of games that PlayStation have allowed off the PlayStation onto PC.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if they've also found their way into GeForce Now.
Yeah.
Things like The Last of Us. I think that made it over to PC. Horizon Zero Dawn made it recently. God of War's made it over. There's probably others I'm forgetting, but I'm assuming they're not in that 1,500 games. And is it fair to say there might be some shovelware in there as well? I mean, all these services probably suffer a bit from bloat. 600 games, 1,500 games. Well, yeah, how many of those are actually games you want to play?
It's true. And to be honest, on their homepage, they had some really good games that were listed on as they were kind of scrolling through them there. Cyberpunk looks like that's on there. Far Cry 6. Control, it's quite an old game now, but it's still really, really good. New World's a fairly new game. I mean, there's quite a few on here that seem quite good, but there will undoubtedly be some rubbish in there.
And who's it for though? So that's my other question. So if you're a diehard PC gamer, you're probably already running a good rig, or you aspirationally want to be running a good rig. So, that service is probably not for me, because I can probably get a lot of those experiences on my consoles, as I'm a console player first. I'm just wondering who that's for as a service, not to downplay the value that's potentially in there, but it seems like it's for the tech enthusiast, especially with the Access R3090s, Access 4K 120 FPS and all that kind of good stuff. But at the same time, I would have thought those hardcore are probably already buying this stuff or desire the hardware. If you're a PC gamer, you're really into PCs, aren't you? Like it's a cult.
Yeah.
In some ways.
I think out of all of them, this one's less about the hardware and more about access to the games everywhere, and access to games that you don't want to buy yet. Is obviously still a benefit. So you can continue your games on the smartphones and tablets and PC wherever you are, but also you get to try out.
Really interesting that hasn't made its way. I mean, like I'm big into the gaming scene, not PC gaming for clarity, but I'm pretty big into that world and following it quite closely. And I'll be honest, GeForce Now has never come across my radar until last week, which just really took me by surprise, given how big and vast the library is, and how it's a very, very viable sort of option or alternative to those other two services we've talked about at depth.
They actually had a box that you could run this on specifically. I think it was called Shield TV. It was like a mix between like an entertainment center, a bit like a Apple TV box, or like the.
I must have just filtered this out.
Yeah. It's in video. It's PC. I don't need to know.
Pass me by. Yeah.
They even had their own version of the controller. They had like their own controllers and stuff for it as well, which was an interesting. Yeah, there it is. I mean, it doesn't look particularly comfortable, but
do you remember the one that Valve were putting together? Their controller was very odd, wasn't it?
Well, a lot of the components of that went onto the Steam Deck, the actual controller components.
Oh, did they?
Yeah. Anyway,
Shall I quickly fly through Nintendo, because their offering really isn't anywhere near as compelling, but it's worth calling out that they do have a game streaming sort of service. So very quickly with Nintendo, they have their own online subscription tiers. It's a 2-tier process, as well as a family plan that accompanies it. Their online offerings are nowhere near as competitive or as compelling as Microsoft's, but they do give you access to a whole retro back catalogue, all of which is sort of played from your Switch. So they don't really have an xCloud or a PlayStation Plus Premium or a GeForce Now, but there is a selection of games available on the Switch which are streaming only. And I thought it was worth calling out because the reason that they're available is that the Switch simply can't run those games. So if you look at something like Witcher 3, which it still blows my mind they managed to get onto a Switch, you are sacrificing an awful lot of graphical fidelity to get that game to run on the Switch. And similar games to it. So I'm just kind of glancing the list here. You mentioned Control. I'll pick on some of the bigger ones. There's a handful of games. Hitman 3, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, and then all of the recent Resident Evil games, both the new and the remakes of 2 and 3. All of those games are available as part of a selection of maybe 20 or so that you can only stream on the Switch. So you can't buy a physical cartridge. You can't download it digitally to your Switch and play it because the hardware can't run it. But you can access them, and you can pay to access them through your Switch if that's your only option. And you can play the Resident Evil remake, for example, but it has to be streamed. And the reason it has to be streamed is simply that the Switch can't compete with the processing and the graphical power that is needed to run those games the way they're intended. And I thought that was really interesting because I guess on one hand, it's good that service is available, that if you want it as a Switch owner, and that's your only console, as many people will be a one console house, then you can still get access to some of these sort of top end graphical games. But I can't imagine that experience is a particularly good one. And it's very restrictive in terms of where you can play it. The Switch is not exactly renowned for being the best in terms of wireless hardware and internet connectivity anyway. Yeah. And then you're entirely reliant on that process. I mean, if you looked at the first Switches, the normal Switch, it didn't even come with an Ethernet port on the dock. Yeah. The OLED version does, and I think possibly the later revisions of the normal Switch also come with it. But the early device, you had to buy a dongle just to be able to connect it to the network in a hardwired fashion. So you were entirely reliant on wireless. So I thought I'd just call it out. It's not really competitive in any way, but there is, at least in a very limited capacity, the ability to stream some games at full price, no subscription, no fancy model. You buy it, you stream it, and I assume when they stop letting you stream it, you lose access to that game. It's probably all in the T's and C's. But I just thought I'd call that out.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually. It reminds me of, and it's maybe a slightly off topic, but there is I think it was Logitech released a device that looked a bit like a Switch, and it can't run any games locally. It only streams. This is kind of the opposite side of the spectrum, but it's still like £300. So game streaming, it's kind of hedging their bets.
You've got the best version, like by all accounts, of mobile handheld gaming that's available, but at a premium. But there are versions that are even more expensive than the Stream Deck that I've seen a lot of popular YouTubers reviewing that are sort of trying to do high-end PC on a mobile device. Yeah. And I think we'll probably do
we'll do an episode, I think, on modern, because I think we'll have a good chat at some point about retro handhelds, but maybe we'll have a separate one on modern handhelds as well. That'll be fun to chat through.
Sounds good.
What you can fit in your pocket.
Talk to me about ShadowTech.
Okay, so ShadowTech so their marketing has changed a lot recently. It used to be very much aimed at gamers. Now they have a very business angle to it as well. So ShadowTech, out of all the streaming services today, is different in that it is literally you connect to a Windows desktop, and that Windows PC that's running that desktop has all the gaming hardware built into it. So it's one of the more expensive ones out of here. It's $29.99, but you get access to a full PC experience, a full desktop that can also support games. So there's obviously a very different version of game streaming because it relies on the fact that you have games to stream. So it relies on you having a Steam library or an Origin library or whichever, or Epic Games or whatever service you use.
So that £30 doesn't unlock a library of games for you. That
it does not.
You are still relying on an additional membership to do that.
It does not. And when I looked at this originally, it wasn't that expensive. As I say, they've changed their marketing. This was, in my eyes, one of the earlier versions of this specifically aimed at gaming. And I was really interested for a while. I had a friend who actually signed up for it, and he really, really enjoyed it because it's not just the games that you could do. You could run anything on there. So say you were into, I don't know, graphics design or whatever that's that needs a particularly powerful PC that you might not have. You can do that on here as well and just run Windows applications. But back in the day when it first came out, it was really aimed to the game streaming services. And running that specifically.
Can I just say that as far as the company name goes, it's as shady as all hell, isn't it? Shadow Tech sounds dodgy as all as anything could sound. It might as well be Skynet.
Yeah,
it just sounds really dodgy. That's a really interesting. I mean, I'll have to read more about it because we're not going to have time to cover it in depth now. But that's a really interesting idea. I'm struggling with it a bit myself. But I guess I don't have any kind of high-end PC requirements, and my PC at home is reasonably high-end enough for what I need it to do. So that's an interesting idea. It feels quite pricey.
Yes.
If you've then got to layer on top of that your own game purchases or game streaming service or whatever, because effectively it's £30 a month plus Xbox Game Pass Ultimate or PlayStation Premium Plus or GeForce Now. Or just, like you said, just buying the games outright and having them accessible through a Steam library or something like that.
Yeah.
But interesting. I've never heard of it. So again, it's PC based, so probably passed me by.
Flew past you. Well, I think this is it's one of the ones that I spotted at the time, but there are lots of other services like this. But this is the one that particularly caught my eye back in the day, and even now it looks a lot more different. Well, it looks different to what I remember. So maybe this isn't the leading one in the space for kind of Windows desktop like experience. I think the pricing is probably in line with Microsoft brought out their version of this, which is aimed at businesses. So you don't get it's not remote desktop, but it's like a remote PC. So instead of having,
wouldn't imagine it's anywhere near as convenient from a sort of consumer perspective, ease of use. I imagine you probably need a bit more about you from a technical perspective to make the best use of this.
For this one, well, it has apps. Yeah. It has apps that you run things on, and it does seem more widely accessible than some of the others. So this is the one that I think I was referencing earlier that works on Apple TV. So there's an app. There's an Android TV app. It says that it works on Oculus Quest, so you could check it out on there if you'd like.
Interesting.
The latency would be interesting, how that would handle in VR situations. If you're already feeling a bit swimmy from running it natively on the PS5, I shudder to think how any latency would impact that.
I don't think you'd be playing. Would you be playing VR games through that? I mean, maybe you could. I don't know how that would work. I assume more virtual desktop.
Yeah, that's true. That's probably more likely the use case, but you could.
Yeah. You could, couldn't you? Potentially. I wonder how that would work. Yeah.
There you go.
And then I guess we're going to round out with the demise of probably one of the potentially what was going to be the biggest players in this space, and that hasn't really worked out.
Yeah.
I don't know how much, did you dabble with this particular service? Do you want to name it?
I didn't. So it feels weird to talk about game streaming and not talk about Google Stadia and the recent fall of Google Stadia. I think. So I brought up an article recently because earlier I didn't realize how recent it was, but it was decommissioned on the 19th of January. And it was announced in September that it was going to be decommissioned. So Google Stadia, for those that don't know, is another version of this game streaming service. It was different in the sense that there wasn't a kind of list of games that you get as part of the subscription. And you had to buy their controller, as far as I remember, at the time. Again, I never used it myself, but I know people who did and who were stung by this decommissioning of Stadia in the end. But the other thing about it is you had to buy their games through Google Stadia. So you owned it through their apps. There wasn't an ecosystem that you could sync it to, and you just had to buy and play games through that app, which meant that when it decommissioned, a lot of people had put a lot of money into these games. Google did end up refunding people for these games.
I was going to say, I think that was the only positive here, is that Google did almost sort of hold their hands up and go, yeah, that hasn't worked. We'll give you your money back. And, they did refund people for those game purchases, which is pretty admirable, really. I mean, I know they're a huge company and they could probably afford it, but that won't have been cheap.
No.
Probably not as expensive as if the platform had took off, but I guess that's the reason why it got folded, because it didn't take off.
True. And Google have been particularly savage with stuff like this. If you remember, Google Glasses was the other one that there was a whole ecosystem built around. A lot of people bought it and they just stopped pushing out updates. And basically, if anyone who has Google Glasses now, they don't work because Google just stopped supporting it. So they are known to can particular projects and products and service updates and things like that for things that they release. So it's just a shame, I think, because it was really, really quite popular. In terms of the streaming services, it was always one that was talked about. Different model, as I say, with the actual purchasing of the games, but...
Weird, because again, I think this comes probably down to the circles of interest and where we operate. Google Stadia, after the initial buzz, was nothing but negativity in the press that I typically read. Now, again, I'm more in the console press. You sound like you're much more in tune with the PC gaming kind of space, and maybe that's where the positivity was. But no one, I mean, there was a lot of enthusiasm for it, and a lot of the big the sort of influencers that I follow in this space all bought into it and were really excited by it. But then very quickly, it became clear from their messages that it really wasn't what they'd hoped for. You're right. I think you had to buy the controllers to access the service. The controllers were quite unique, weren't they? Because they had a direct connection to the internet, which supposedly dealt with the latency issues. I'm not sure if that was true. I'm
not sure actually. It says that I suppose the other saving grace is that it's suggesting here that you get to keep the controller and still use it as like a Bluetooth controller.
Woohoo! Yeah, I mean, it was what I thought was quite interesting about the proposition. I remember it when it was launched. I was really excited for how it was going to integrate with things like YouTube and Twitch.
Yes,
YouTube specifically, because obviously that was where they were going to try and push the services. And there was this idea that you could be watching your favorite YouTuber, and then from your Google Stadia, you could, if they were allowing it, you could hop into a game with them, and it would just like instantly take you in.
Yeah.
And you could join in, and there was all this kind of meta layer around what you were doing that would kind of give you stats and interactions and things, and you could go live instantly from your Stadia device and all this kind of stuff. I don't think any of that really materialized, did it? Or if it did, it never made it back into the press. But it's a real shame, because
it is a shame, and it's an ecosystem that could have definitely made use for it with as you say, YouTube, and Google is a vast amount of products and services that they sell that they could have integrated into it. So it is a shame.
And resources and hardware. I mean, like you said, the biggest mistake was that you paid for your subscription and then you had to pay for your games on top, which made no sense. Either the subscription should be free and you can buy whatever you want from the store, and then that's when you start consuming the services, or you pay a subscription and there should be some sort of library behind it. But I guess that business model in either form didn't work for them. Real shame, that one. But I think the writing was on the wall for it, wasn't it? Fairly early on, even the games that they had access to were fairly limited. There was they got a fair few decent big hitters, but there was a lot of games never made it as far as Stadia.
Yeah.
Which is a shame, because the concept, again, really clever. And I think, remember when it was announced, thinking it felt a little bit Ready Player One, not the VR side, but yeah, it felt futuristic and it felt exciting. It just didn't really end up delivering. It's a real shame.
So, conscious of time, we're going to wrap up, I think, with our verdicts on our overall thoughts of stream services. I am still a bit hesitant. I think the latency for me is still not great. I do hope one day that, I mean, I don't have particularly slow internet neither. I have very fast internet. The ping may not be the best, which might be what's screwing me up, but I think the latency, I can really, really feel it. So it's not there for me yet, so I don't think I'll be signing up to one anytime soon. Jay, What are your thoughts? I know
You've
you
already
signed
up
up
to one. You're signed up to the same one I am.
I know. On a trial.
Okay. I am probably with you in as much as I'm not bothered. I think it's interesting. The reason though for me is slightly different to you. So the latency thing I think is less of a problem for me. But I haven't really experimented with it at length, so I couldn't say that I've had a properly good experience. The real thing that's for me recently as well, more recently than in the last couple of years really, is that I think I just prefer the idea of physical ownership. And you can probably see in the background, I've got quite a lot of consoles and old stuff, and I've been really into collecting the physical. I at one point, just a couple of years ago, I was all in on just making everything digital, and then I've kind of backpedaled and backtracked, and now I think I'm in the opposite camp. I like the idea of physically owning at least the big games that really sort of mean something to me. So don't know that I like the idea of everything moving to subscription and then never owning again. You look at music, for example. I mean, I'm not big into music, and I suppose there's an argument that I could still buy, but music sales have undoubtedly been shattered by the likes of Spotify and Apple Music. There are still the hardcore, and I'm sure people still go out and buy the odd album from their favorite bands, but it's seriously damaged those sales. And I guess I worry a little bit that 20, 30 years time, will I still be able to access the games that I love? Can I still play the games that I can currently play here? Now, preservation of video games is an entirely separate topic, but it's much harder to do than preserving music or preserving movies because of the amount of the infrastructure and the hardware and the emulation challenges and all of this kind of stuff. It's not as simple as taking music from a CD that was made 20, 30 years ago and being able to play that or sort of rip it and play it. The game hardware requirements are so different that I just worry a little bit about whether or not we'll lose generations of video games. So for me, it's not something that I would move to as a primary. I like it as a backup option, but I'd always want it to be a kind of secondary alternative to playing on the console, owning the game, and playing it, locally on a piece of hardware. I also just a bit of a console nerd. I like having the hardware. There's something nice about seeing these hardware revisions and getting excited about new hardware launches. Would you need that in a world where everything was streamed? Probably not, because you don't even need a decent console. You can do it through your TV.
True.
Which is nice and convenient, but it sort of takes a lot away from the industry that I love.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
The flip side to that is that it's what happened with the the music streaming services is that it opens up an awful lot of access to music that people might not have gained access to. So potentially this could open up indie creators to hop on streaming services and a much wider audience for being able to play these games, which ultimately will make them more popular in the end. So,
and I like that, and that's a really good point, because that goes for the same for digital in general. But I like the fact that you've got companies like Limited Run Games who make, literally as the name suggests, limited run physical prints of games for certain consoles that were only available digitally. And I like the idea that if you're really into a game, you can support the developer and you can go and buy a physical version for your collection. But like you said, you get a vast library of things that you can go and access. I do feel like music's perhaps not the best example. I'd look more at the movie industry and the TV industry. Maybe this is just the old man in me, but I feel like movies have suffered as a result of the likes of Netflix and Amazon Prime and Disney Plus. I think the quality of what's going into the cinemas is vastly reduced. On the flip side, arguably better television shows now.
Oh yeah,
much better and engaging TV, but too much of it just in general. But I don't know. I love the cinema experience, and I have had very few genuinely exciting cinema experiences as a result of this big shift and the sort of mass production of all this kind of content. I feel like it's damaged it. So I would worry a little bit about volume taking away, or quantity, outstripping quality in video games, and just being this kind of rush of shovelware onto platforms, onto streaming services. And how do you then try and find the best stuff? How do companies get to invest the time they need to make really good quality games if the margins are even more squeezed? I don't know. One for another day.
All good points. Cool. Well, I think we'll leave it there. That's all for this episode. Thanks for hanging out with us. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and all good podcasting services so you don't miss an episode. You can check us out on Twitch at Jay and Robbie, where we stream 3 times a week and play a variety of games. See you next time.